Hello and welcome back to Uncle Sal's Garage. On the last episode, we assembled the long block and dressed the motor. On today's episode, we're firing this baby up. And we're on a tight timeline too because I want to make it to Dust Ball Adirondack with this new motor in the car. Let's get started.
Step 1. Building the test stand.
Well, woodworking is really not my forte, which is why I'm not focusing on this right now. But basically, I've got my 4 legs. They're two 2x4s, sistered, and I've got a threaded insert for my big wheels. Then I'll connect the 2 sides with this scrap. I got a scrap white oak shelf that I never installed.
As I mentioned in the last video, I set about woodworking, building the cart, and locating where the shims and pickup points would be for the motor mounts. Step 2. Buttoning up and dressing the motor. Once I got the engine up on the new stand, I was able to set the end play and install the rear main seal.
This is with no shims in it. This is just the flywheel on the crank. When I pull it out, I'm at 24 thousandths. And there really are no shim assortments that with 3 shims get you to 24 thousandths. But all 3 together equal 320, around there. So that's 32 thousandths, right? And my point is the max play on my crank here is only 24 thousandths with no shims. So obviously, if I put all 3 shims that just came off the old motor, old crank, old everything, I'd be over. I'd have more. The crank would be pushed out more than it needs to be. So I don't think I want to do that. But everyone says you got to use 3. And if I just use, I think I'm just gonna use 1 because I think I want to go for the tolerance, not necessarily the shim number.
In the end, I ordered a new set of shims, used 2 of them, and got my end play down to 5 thousandths. Next, I installed the starter and the Zalex control box and wired everything up. Then I hit my heater flaps with a heat gun to make sure they went up and down. Now it was time to test the motor to make sure I was getting oil pressure.
Oh, all right.
It worked!
All right.
Woohoo! Run it, I achieve oil pressure. Check this out. Oil light goes off because the pressure has been built in the oil circuit. It goes back on when the pressure goes back down again, but that is a huge step.
Then I tested the spark plugs to make sure our ignition system was working properly.
Yes! There it is. Nice! All right.
Last, I dressed the motor with some carburetors and installed a temporary fuel pump to get the motor ready to fire for the first time. That's when disaster struck. Step 3. Overcoming the first start disaster. There's really not much more to it than this. I prepped the motor, rolled it out to the driveway, got it ready to start, hit the button, and saw a very slow crank. It was at this point that I figured I had done something wrong. Maybe I built the motor incorrectly. Maybe there was some mechanical interference. So I decided to start tearing the motor down and look for the problem. Step -1. Tearing it back down to build it back up again.
I need to basically start to take everything off and, bit by bit and see if it spins freely, identify the problem. All right, this is with the other rocker assembly removed on the cylinders 3-4 side. And, yeah, I mean, there's a bind area there. I gotta admit, I probably should have really felt this better before continuing. I mean, it's way easier to move now that the springs are off it, but it's not a breeze. I should have known. So there's something going on. I'm actually going to take the flywheel off because I had set the end play and I don't really know what I'm doing with end plate stuff and maybe even rear main seal stuff. So I'm gonna take this off and take a look at it, see what's going on in there. So I'll be right back. There's no obvious tearing or binding on the rear main seal here. That's just oil. And there's my 2 shims on the inside there. So I don't know. That looks fine. Okay, perhaps obviously, after taking off cylinders 1 and 2, it spins pretty freely. I don't sense any binding. All right, well, I don't think it's the bottom end because, I mean, it spins very, very freely. There's no bind. There's no bind point whatsoever. It just continues to go around. There's tons of follow through. I mean, obviously, there's no friction. There's no cylinders, but, you know, that's spinning freely for sure. So the issue had to be somewhere in my pistons, cylinders, potentially my head. So I'm gonna stop breaking it down at this point, and I'm gonna start building it back up again with paying attention that I'm not messing something else up. So there you go. I went and washed everything, soap and water. I kind of went back to square one, took all the rings off, got on these channels here, made sure everything was super clean. Oiled up my jugs here so that they don't rust.
Just to leave no stone unturned, I rechecked the ring gaps and reinstalled the rings and reclocked the pistons in the cylinders. They always say doing something a second time is easier than the first, and that's certainly true here. The pistons and cylinders went in no problem.
All right, I reinstalled the pistons and cylinders and torqued down the heads. And let's see how tight it is. Yeah, it's exactly the same tightness as before. Okay, as noted, with each step building up from the short block, the resistance to turn the motor gets stronger and stronger. And that's obvious because you have friction with the pistons and cylinders. Now I've got friction with the rocker assembly.
Then I reset the end play and redressed the motor with all of its accessories, getting it ready for its second first start. Step 4. It was electrical all along.
When you look at building an engine and the kind of person that's going to build an engine, and I have this conversation with technicians all the time, it's a mechanical gearhead with octane and gears in its head, and it's using the one side of the brain that's very mechanical, it's very tangible, and it's very here in front of us. The part with electrical is using the opposite completely side of your brain, where it's absolutely like abstract, and it's using a completely different gear set. Now, in an automotive realm, a master tech now has to be an electric car tech, and it's a huge paradigm shift, but it still applies to a garage where your local gearhead's got octane and gears rattling in his head, understanding the electricity where the ground is the feed, and the positive is the return. Yeah. And the reason why the positive sparks more than the ground is because the electron is flowing, and the electron is magnetically being sucked back into that battery. And that's why it's hot. So now we have a good positive side, so like the return is good, but it's not feeding in. The electrons, the ocean of electrons is not filling your whole block where it's got like a well to pull from.
Think of it like a pipe of water.
And it's
That's
down,
the choke point?
and
Yeah.
that's the whole choke
Yep.
point. The flow of fuel into your electric system comes from the ground. And that's why your chassis ground, you have a whole chassis reservoir full of electrons that everything can pull from. It's almost like a big reservoir.
So the issue all along was that my positive and negative leads weren't creating enough of a contact patch with the battery and the motor to create a sufficient charge to get the starter going. So we cleaned everything up, added some more connectors, and jumped it with the Audi. So in the end, the issue was electrical, not mechanical, and it turns out I did all that tearing down for nothing. But the good news is, I was sure we were ready to send it in the car. Step 5. Sending it in the car. At this point, given the timeline we were under, I decided to work as hard as possible to get this work done and not worry about filming all of the intermediate steps. So I didn't document too much of the engine swap process. Honestly, I followed Ian Carr's video instructions step by step and there weren't too many surprises. If you'd like to see how I did it, I'll link his original video up in the description.
Yes.
All right, well, that's close. And then we completed our initial start braking process, running the motor for 20 minutes and setting the timer.
Now, 27, 6, 7,
So, the motor's in the car, and the car starts and runs.
Great success.
Up next on Uncle Sal's Garage, breaking in the motor so that it's ready for dust ball.